Up next is me, Tom Trowbridg. I'm going to be talking, though, not about Fluence. I'm going to be talking about the token economics report about in the DePIN sector that I published not that long ago, just about a month ago. Let's dive into it if we can, and as soon as this is over. But I guess the real point is that we've seen a lot of research in DePIN, but most research has skirted around token economics. And I think that's a mistake, because token economics are what is going to make this industry soar. And getting it right is critical. And I think there's a lot of experiments out there, but it's also clear a couple compelling models. And I want to go into that in detail. And this is designed to provide a guide for projects and also for investors so they can evaluate and understand it. But the general thesis is that as DePIN generates revenue, investors are going to put a lot of scrutiny on the token economics. And that's because you've heard me say this before, but DePIN is not a meme. And the revenue is going to make that very clear. By the way, on the token economic side, there's no one way projects describe it. It's in Twitter. It's in Telegram. It's on a website. It's in a white paper. There is no standard model for this. And that makes it hard to do this work. And I would ask every project to make it as simple as possible, because it'll help you get investors. We've defined DePIN already, so we can skip that. These are the cloud versus digital DePINs. This is kind of important to mention in token economics, because you've got different demands for a token, different uses of token. And main point here is trust is different. So the cloud DePINs need to generate trust because of what they're doing that normally would be provided by a reputation, a brand, and legal frameworks. Regular physical DePINs don't need that as much, because it's actually the hardware is provided often manufactured by the protocol. And so also the consequence of fraud is much less. If one camera or a couple cameras are doing fraudulent data, that doesn't really jeopardize the network. But if you're running a cloud DePIN and you are not serving a customer, that's a big deal. So these two things have very different requirements in terms of what the token can do and how it works. And the need for trust is a key piece of that. When talking about DePIN, I think the easiest way to explain this to the non-crypto world is to compare it to Airbnb and Uber, right? These are two companies, huge companies that use crowdsourced infrastructure to provide a service. But there's very important differences. So let's look at those differences here. The main point, though, the first similar difference is Airbnb and Uber do not buy houses or cars, right? They leave that to the individuals. But that's pretty much where the difference ends. And the key piece here is that if you were an early Uber rider, you don't share in the success of Uber. Maybe you get more rides, maybe as it gets bigger and better known, but that's it. In crypto, if you're an early DePIN service provider, you get tokens. Those tokens should go up a lot in value. That's not possible in the traditional model. The other key model here I think is interesting is this marketing expense, right? These other Airbnb and Uber are consumer platforms. They have to spend billions to drive consumers. DePIN platforms are almost exclusively business-to-business platforms, or really consumer-to-business platforms. They don't need to market. They just need a BD team. So you have a massively different expense structure. And that is a huge, huge difference. So those are, I guess, the two critical pieces of this, is the ability to participate in the platform growth, and then also the much lighter capital requirements from the DePIN projects. Why is DePIN big now? There are these three building blocks, which have all converged in the last couple of years to make it work. You have crypto economics, which has grown significantly. You have hardware pricing, which has fallen. And importantly, some hardware has come off of patent, which has actually enabled some of the services you see to be offered at a competitive level. Key piece of a Helium router came off of patent. If it was still in patent, the Helium router would cost 10 times what it does today. And then also open source software availability also gone dramatically up in the last kind of 5 years. So these three things together is what has made this industry possible. And I think that you got to sort of step back and realize why this is happening now. this is the value proposition for DePIN. And I've talked about this a little bit in my intro slide, but I want to talk about it, make sure people grasp it here, because these are a couple of projects you're going to hear from Spexy pretty short, right after lunch, actually. But you can see the value proposition, right? You're creating a better service at a cheaper price, and you're doing it with almost no capital expenditures. So that's very difficult to compete with from a centralized level. And the question then becomes, how do you monetize this? And just because you do that, that's great. But it has to flow to the token, or else someone else will do something very similar, because there's very little proprietary, right? The whole point is these are protocols, so they should be able to be copied by somebody else. So if you don't do a good job with your token economics, someone else is going to come along and do a better job and outcompete you pretty quickly. So how does this work? And so let's take a case study. Look at Geode. They hit an all-time high a couple of months ago. I think the only tokens hit an all-time high recently. It's down a bit now, but it is the strongest performing token in the universe. And I think that is very important to figure out why. So let's look at what they do. First, the value proposition. Without value proposition, I don't think in DePIN you get anywhere. And they have double the coverage of the centralized competitors who have been around for a decade. So better coverage, cheaper price, revenue, which is great, and a huge market size that they're going after. All of that is good, but what really matters is the token economics. And this is a sports quote from a long time ago, but tokenomics isn't the only thing. Isn't the thing. It's the only thing. And this gets back to why Geode is up, I believe, and I think others will see it, which is the buy burn component. And you'll see that you have reward schedules which range significantly from different tokens. There's a whole number of different reward schedules, also hard to find out. But once you dig into it, you realize that the rewards are usually an arbitrary amount of tokens. I think that presents a problem over the long term, because an arbitrary amount of tokens means that the reward in dollar value can be super high or super low, depending on where the crypto market is. I don't think that's sustainable. And you'll see a little bit more about that in a second, because here you always are worried about what happens with a low token price. You also have problems with a high token price. And so what projects need to be thinking of is, in a low token price, how are my rewards valuable? For example, if the rewards are so high, they're just minting rewards, they may not actually care about doing the hard work to service customers. We've seen that with early projects. And then obviously, in a low token price, people just lose interest, turn it off, don't care, don't service it. So you actually are at risk at a DePIN project in either of these scenarios. And so there's an easy way to protect this, but very few projects have done so. And so what you should probably do is have your rewards linked to fiat. And if it's a fiat link reward, you're invulnerable to these token price swings. And people are joining your ecosystem because they have certainty with what value they're going to get. That is very important. It also makes them predictable, dependable, and you get a different type of provider. Also important, you should price the system in fiat. If you price it just in tokens, customers can't budget. If it costs 100 tokens for something, a customer that wants to budget out for 2 years or 6 months can never budget what the actual service will cost. So service should cost something in fiat, and maybe it's paid in tokens, great, but it has to have a fiat price or you're not going to get adoption. And so this goes back to what the token economies are, the scarcity, and how you drive this token price. And so for the physical DePINs, they're generating revenue. Buy burn is the clear way to have that revenue flow to the token. They take the revenue, and as you heard Thomas say, they buy burn about 75% of that revenue in and take the token and buy it. For the marketplace, which are more of the cloud DePINs, that's usually demand comes from staking. And as that cloud grows, the more devices added to the network, the more stake is required, the more tokens are locked up. Those are the two kind of compelling, most compelling uses for the token. And if you look at that, you will see that, here's a couple of examples of why then of projects that do buy burn and how it works. And if you think about it, if you have a project that has a high buy burn, you have no need for anyone else to ever discover your project, right? If you're generating millions of dollars in revenue and it's growing, you are buying your token, you're burning it, and you don't need to market it. You don't have to worry about being the next hot thing because your project is just out there doing it. As an investor in that project, if you make the right call and that project is actually generating and growing revenue, you don't have to spend the time marketing it because you're the demand for that token. And I think that is going to be that's going to become very clear. It's already clear with Geode. It's going to become clear later on. And if you look, this is a graph of buy burn ratios at a number of projects that have tokens outstanding. And you can see that a couple are incredibly high, and anything less than 100 starts to diverge from the team and the token holders. And you want to be as aligned between the team and token holders as you possibly can. And so I think that the very high level is where you want to be on this map. Some of these are a little bit arbitrary. Grass, for example, I don't think they've actually announced what that number is going to be. So I think that's sort of a guess. But Geode is at 80% or even higher. Glow and Render are very high. And so again, the revenue has to scale for this to be relevant. But as it scales, you're going to see, I think, a big differentiation. And as a thought experiment, the other thing to think about here is there's projects that claim a lot of revenue. If they claim revenue and it's not a buy burn, how do you know to trust it? Think about all the fraud we've seen in crypto so far, right? This is a hot space. People want to be hot in it, and they're going to make lots of revenue claims. There's no auditors, there's no SEC, and there is no regulatory body to ever validate or verify any of this revenue, right? So how do you verify it? This is the only way, by buy burn. And so if two projects each claim to have 10 million revenue and one burns 8 million and the other burns $1 million, I think you're going to trust the one that burned 8 million transparently a lot more than the other one, which claimed 10 million bucks in revenue and just burned $1 million. Because how do you know? So on-chain revenue and on-chain buy burn is what is going to actually make this industry trusted. And I'm going to say, to be clear, I expect there to be some level of exaggeration in revenue. It's happened all over crypto. It will happen here. This is the way we actually jump over that and become more trusted even than audited companies, right? If you have a transparent buy burn, you're even more trusted than an auditor, I would believe. So the next is the cloud DePINs. So I mentioned this briefly, but as they scale, you need more stake, right? So as you add servers for storage, as you add servers for compute, as you add servers for rendering, usually if your stake goes up by every server added, you should increase the lockup of your token. You should increase the scarcity of that token, and that should drive token value as well. This is more appropriate for marketplaces that don't generate nearly the revenue that the physical DePINs do, because the revenue is generally going to the actual providers themselves. But that's the way we see this sort of cloud DePIN generating value and generating token demand. And you've seen it with these projects here. And so this is, I think, also an important point about stake. Early crypto cloud projects required the provider to stake. This was when all the hardware was generally retail hardware. You put your computer on, you put your Wi-Fi network on. Going forward, we want, I think, as an industry, to have the most institutional providers possible. And many of them are not familiar, don't understand tokens, and don't want the cost of staking tokens. So we think investors should be able to stake. Early DePIN networks don't really allow investors to stake. There are some services which have come online to provide that, which is good. It comes at a cost. So you lower costs if you have investors able to stake, and you increase the ability for institutional providers to provide that service. And so, for example, this is just mentioning Fluence here for a second. We require our stake in dollars, and it's $12,000 per CPU. And so to think of that in scale, there are 600 hyperscaler data centers in the world. Each one has about 50,000 servers. When we get to the level of one of those data centers, it will require 600 million of FLT to be staked, right? That's way more than our fully diluted market cap right now, right? So if you want to turn on servers, you want to earn revenue from those servers, people are going to have to buy this token to stake it. That should have a powerful impact as we scale to this. Now, the scale is not happening imminently. We're making progress towards it, but this is how we think about it and the goal that we're shooting towards. Another point on rewards is that when you have rewards that you have to pay to a large number of consumers, it's never going to be enough to make it super exciting for each person. If you're selling your audio data or your phone data, it's never going to be enough money value-wise to be interesting. So we see a lot of projects implement lotteries. And so if you're providing service for some period of time, you're entered into a lottery. That lottery gives you a chance to win something big. And that's an interesting gamification that actually keeps people interested despite the low value that they're receiving. And so this is the way we think of the winning model for DePIN token economics, right? You want to accept revenue in fiat, have a fiat front end. You want to have customers, then you want to have, either stake or you want to have buy burn. And you want to have a fiat linked reward so that your providers have more certainty with the rewards that they're getting. And I also think I should add on to this, frankly, that the lottery reward for consumer-oriented DePIN providers also makes a ton of sense. So those I think are the kind of the key business model, and also keeping that marketing expense low is critical. I don't think any DePIN is going to become close to the Airbnb and Uber marketing expense, and they don't need to. Governance, also very important. These are kind of three of the oldest DePIN projects with very active on-chain governance. I think the newer generation is less decentralized, for better or worse. I think that will help us get more scale faster, but this is a great model. I mean, Helium has passed 130 proposals and done some very complicated network changes. Akash has done a lot of work through the decentralized protocol. So I think the decentralized governance can work. These projects show it works. And I hope DePIN projects now, which tend to be more centralized from a governance perspective, will take lessons from this and learn this. And I think ultimately need to be that way in order to be successful from a securities perspective. Overall, I think this is a success formula. And we think about this as like, what's a big market? Cloud is a big market. Telco is a big market, right? There's a lot of big markets that DePIN is targeting. And there are also a lot of unhappy customers in those markets, whether it's cloud or telco. So if you add those two things together with a live network product and token economics, you're going to have a high value. And I think that's what we're all looking forward to. And I think that you're going to see that resilient networks with lower cost. This is the formula for success, which is coming very soon. So ultimately, it wins because you've got great service with token economics, and you end up with the next generation of crypto. And if you think about this back to the first slide I mentioned, one of the first slides, think about each of these trends. Where are each of these trends going? This token market, this is only going one way. It's only getting bigger, right? This is only getting larger. Where's software availability and maturity? Only getting bigger and more mature. How's hardware pricing? Only going down, right? So if you think fast forward 5 years, everything that took DePIN to where it is today is only going to be further, right? So the DePIN outlook is fabulous, right? We've got to where we are today, and each of these trends, which DePIN relies on, are only going in one direction. So this is a powerful combination, and we're in a perfect place for this to scale. So if you want to read more about the detail and about token economics in the DePIN sector, please take a look at this report, and please send me comments, send me questions, so I can do a better one next time. So hopefully this is useful. Thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate it.